Captain Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the black sedan onto the sun-baked asphalt of Fort Henderson in eastern North Carolina. The heat hit her like a wall, but she didn't flinch. She'd felt worse. Much worse. She adjusted her uniform, smoothed down her jacket, and grabbed her duffel bag from the trunk. This was her new assignment. A fresh start, they'd called it. But Sarah knew better than to believe in fresh starts. The base was alive with activity. Soldiers jogged past in formation. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the crack of gunfire from the rifle range. It was all familiar, comforting even. The military had been her life for 12 years, and despite everything, it was the only place she truly felt at home. She walked toward the main administrative building, her boots striking the pavement with purpose. Inside, the air conditioning was a relief. A young corporal at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Captain Mitchell?" he asked. "That's me," she replied. "Welcome to Fort Henderson, ma'am. Major Lawson is expecting you. Third door on the left." Sarah nodded and made her way down the corridor. The walls were lined with photographs of distinguished officers, commendations, and framed mission patches. She'd earned a few of those herself, though she never felt the need to display them. She knocked twice on the door marked Major Derek Lawson, Operations Commander. "Enter," came a voice from inside. Sarah pushed open the door and stepped into the office. Major Lawson sat behind a large wooden desk, his eyes fixed on a computer screen. He was in his early 40s, square-jawed, with closely cropped hair going gray at the temples. He didn't look up immediately, and Sarah stood at attention, waiting. Finally, he glanced up. His eyes swept over her quickly, and something shifted in his expression. It wasn't quite a smirk, but it was close. "Captain Mitchell," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Welcome aboard." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady and professional. Lawson gestured to a chair. "Sit." She sat, keeping her posture straight, her hands resting on her knees. Lawson picked up a file from his desk and flipped it open. "Says here you're being transferred from the 75th Ranger Regiment. Special operations background. Deployment to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria." He looked up at her, one eyebrow raised. "Impressive resume." "I did my job, sir," Sarah said simply. Lawson closed the file and tossed it back onto the desk. "Well, Fort Henderson runs a little differently than what you might be used to. We've got a good team here. Tight-knit. They've been working together for years. I'm sure you understand that earning their trust might take some time." Sarah nodded. "I understand, sir." Lawson leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "I'll be honest with you, Captain. When I requested a new tactical officer, I was expecting someone with, let's say, a different profile. But higher up sent you, so here we are." Sarah felt the familiar tightening in her chest, but she kept her face neutral. "I assure you, sir, I'm fully qualified for this position." "Oh, I'm sure you are," Lawson said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "On paper, anyway. But paper and real-world performance are two different things. We'll see how you handle yourself in the field." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Sarah rose as well. "Briefing is tomorrow morning at 0700, Lawson said. "Conference room B, don't be late." "I won't, sir." As Sarah turned to leave, Lawson spoke again. "Captain?" She paused and looked back. He gave her a thin smile. "Make sure you bring your A-game. The men here don't have much patience for distractions." Sarah held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Understood, sir." She left the office, her jaw tight. She dealt with men like Lawson before. Men who saw her and made assumptions. Men who looked at her face, her build, her gender, and decided she couldn't possibly be as capable as her record claimed. It was exhausting, but she'd learned long ago not to waste energy on anger. She'd let her work speak for itself. That evening, Sarah settled into her quarters, a small but functional room in the officers' barracks. She unpacked her few belongings, uniforms, a few books, a photograph of her family. She set the photo on the bedside table and stared at it for a moment. Her parents, her younger brother, all smiling at a barbecue 3 summers ago. Before everything changed, she changed into her PT gear and went for a run around the base perimeter. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She pushed herself hard, letting the burn in her legs and lungs drown out the noise in her head. By the time she returned to her quarters, she was drenched in sweat but felt calmer. The next morning, Sarah woke at 0500, 2 hours before the briefing. She showered, dressed, and made her way to the mess hall for coffee. A few early risers were scattered around the room, mostly enlisted personnel. She grabbed a cup of black coffee and sat alone at a corner table, reviewing notes on her tablet. At 06:45, she headed to conference room B. She was the first to arrive. The room was set up with a long table, chairs on either side, and a projector screen at the front. She took a seat halfway down the table and waited. Others began to filter in. 3 male officers, all captains or lieutenants, entered together. They glanced at her, exchanged looks, but said nothing. Then a female lieutenant entered, gave Sarah a brief nod, and sat across from her. Finally, Major Lawson strode in carrying a briefcase and a coffee mug. He set his things down at the head of the table and looked around. "Morning," he said. "Let's get started. We've got a lot to cover, and I don't want to waste time." He gestured toward Sarah. "For those who haven't met her yet, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell. She'll be joining our operations team. Captain, why don't you tell everyone a little about yourself?" All eyes turned to Sarah. She stood, keeping her expression calm and professional. "Good morning," she began. "I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell. I've spent the last 8 years in special operations, including multiple deployments overseas. I'm looking forward to working with all of you." She sat back down. It was brief, but she wasn't one for long speeches. One of the male officers, a stocky captain with a buzz cut, leaned back in his chair. "Special operations, huh? What did you do, logistics, intel?" "Direct action," Sarah replied evenly. "Raids, reconnaissance, hostage rescue." The man exchanged a glance with the officer beside him, a smirk playing at his lips. "No offense, ma'am, but you don't exactly look like someone who kicks down doors." A few chuckles rippled around the table. Sarah didn't react. "Looks can be deceiving, Captain." Major Lawson cleared his throat. "All right, settle down. We've got work to do." But as the briefing began, Sarah could feel the skepticism in the room. It hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. She'd have to prove herself all over again, just like always. The briefing covered standard operational matters: upcoming training exercises, equipment requisitions, personnel rotations. Sarah listened carefully, taking notes, absorbing the rhythms and procedures of her new unit. Major Lawson ran the meeting with military precision, but she noticed how his attention lingered on her whenever he made a point, as if checking whether she was keeping up. When the meeting ended, the other officers filed out, their conversations resuming in the hallway. Sarah gathered her materials and started to leave when Lawson called out, "Captain Mitchell, a word." She turned back. The room was empty now except for the 2 of them. Lawson closed his laptop and looked at her. "I'm assigning you to lead the next field training exercise. It's scheduled for next week. 3-day tactical simulation in the Woodland Range. You'll have a squad of 12 soldiers, mixed experience levels." Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir." "What are the objectives?" "Simulate a hostage rescue scenario. Your team will need to navigate hostile territory, locate the target, extract them safely, and return to base. Standard stuff, but it's a good way for you to get your feet wet here." "I appreciate the opportunity, sir." Lawson crossed his arms. "I'll be observing along with the other senior officers. We use these exercises to evaluate leadership under pressure. I'm sure you'll do fine." There was something in the way he said it that made it sound like the opposite, like he expected her to fail. "I'll do my best, sir," Sarah said. "I'm sure you will." He paused, then added, "Just remember, these soldiers have been training together for a while. They know each other's strengths and weaknesses. You're the unknown variable. Don't take it personally if they're slow to follow your lead." "Understood, sir." She left the room and headed back to her quarters, her mind already working through logistics and strategy. A 3-day field exercise was a significant test, especially with a new team. She'd have to earn their respect quickly and demonstrate tactical competence from the start. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into preparation. She studied maps of the training area, reviewed personnel files of the soldiers she'd be leading, and ran through dozens of scenarios in her mind. She also made a point to introduce herself to each member of her assigned squad during daily PT and meal times. Most were professional, if reserved. A few were openly skeptical. One sergeant, a tall man named Kowalski, made his doubts clear during their first meeting. "Ma'am, with all respect," he said, "most of us have run this kind of exercise 4 or 5 times. We know the terrain, we know the drill. Maybe it'd be better if you just let us handle it and you observe this first time around." Sarah met his eyes. I appreciate your experience, Sergeant, but I've been assigned to lead this exercise, and that's what I intend to do. I'm open to your input, but the final decisions will be mine. Clear? Kowalski shifted his weight, clearly unhappy, but he nodded. Clear, ma'am. Word spread quickly that the new captain wasn't going to be a pushover, but that didn't ease the tension. Sarah could feel it every time she walked into a room, the sidelong glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she got close. She'd been through this before, but it never got easier. The evening before the exercise, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, going over her notes one last time. There was a knock at the door. Come in, she called. The door opened and Lieutenant Emily Ortiz stepped inside. She was the female officer from the briefing, a communications specialist with 4 years of service. Captain, you got a minute? Ortiz asked. Of course. What's on your mind? Ortiz closed the door and sat down. I just wanted to give you a heads up. The guys are talking. Some of them are planning to test you tomorrow. Nothing dangerous, but they might not follow orders as quickly as they should. They want to see how you handle it. Sarah sighed. I figured as much. Thanks for the warning. Ortiz hesitated, then said, For what it's worth, I've seen your record. I know what you've done. I think you're going to surprise a lot of people here. Sarah gave her a small smile. I appreciate that, Lieutenant. After Ortiz left, Sarah stared at the ceiling, her mind turning. She'd been underestimated her entire career. At first, it had made her angry. Then it had made her determined. Now it just made her tired. But tired or not, she had a job to do. The next morning, the squad assembled at the edge of the training range. It was still dark, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east. Sarah stood in front of her team, all 12 of them in full tactical gear, weapons loaded with simunitions. Listen up, she said, her voice cutting through the early morning chill. This exercise is designed to test your tactical decision-making, teamwork, and adaptability. We have 72 hours to locate and extract a simulated hostage from a fortified position, approximately 15 miles into the woodland range. Enemy combatants will be played by the OPFOR unit, and they will not make this easy. She paused, making eye contact with each soldier. I expect discipline, clear communication, and total commitment. If you have questions or concerns, bring them to me. If you have a better tactical idea, I want to hear it. But once a decision is made, we move as one unit. Understood? A chorus of "Yes, ma'am" echoed back, though some voices were more enthusiastic than others. Good. Let's move out. They entered the woods in tactical formation, Sarah at the front with Sergeant Kowalski. The terrain was dense, a mix of pine and hardwood with thick underbrush that made silent movement difficult. Sarah navigated using a combination of GPS and old-fashioned map reading, calling out direction changes and hand signals. 4 hours in, they encountered their first challenge. A narrow ravine blocked their path with steep sides and a swift-moving stream at the bottom. The easiest route would be to follow the ravine east until it leveled out, but that would add 2 hours to their travel time. Kowalski pointed east. Standard procedure is to go around, ma'am. Sarah studied the ravine, then looked up at the trees. We're crossing here. Kowalski frowned. Ma'am, that's going to be risky. If someone slips, we'll use ropes and harnesses. Set up a belay system on both sides. It'll take 30 minutes and we'll be across without losing time. Kowalski looked like he wanted to argue, but he bit it back. Yes, ma'am. They set up the system and one by one the soldiers crossed the ravine. It went smoothly, and they were back on schedule. Sarah saw the surprise in Kowalski's eyes and maybe a hint of respect. But the real test came that night. They'd set up a defensive perimeter in a clearing, rotating watch shifts. Sarah took the last watch herself, from 0400 to 0600. She was crouched near the edge of the camp when she heard movement in the trees. OPFOR, she signaled silently to wake the others. Within seconds, the entire squad was alert, weapons ready. The attack came from 3 sides, simunitions cracking through the darkness. Sarah directed fire, repositioned her team, and called in a tactical retreat to higher ground. It was chaos, but controlled chaos. Her orders were clear and decisive. The squad responded, and within 20 minutes they'd repelled the attack with minimal simulated casualties. As dawn broke, Kowalski approached her. Good call on the high ground, ma'am. That saved us, Sarah nodded. Good work holding the left flank, Sergeant. Something had shifted. She could feel it. But she also knew that the real test was still ahead. Major Lawson was watching, and he was waiting for her to fail. The second day of the exercise pushed them harder. The simulated hostage was located in an old concrete bunker, a relic from Cold War-era training, now repurposed as OPFOR headquarters. Intelligence reports indicated at least 20 enemy combatants, heavily armed with fortified positions. Sarah called her squad together in a concealed position half a mile from the target. They were tired, dirty, and running on minimal sleep. But their eyes were sharp. They were starting to trust her. She could see it in the way they leaned in, when she spoke, the way they waited for her orders without hesitation. "We go in at dusk," she said, pointing to the map spread out on the ground. 2 teams. Alpha team, led by Sergeant Kowalski, will create a diversion on the east side. Loud, visible, draw their attention. Bravo team, with me, will enter from the west, locate the hostage, and extract. Once we have the package, Alpha falls back to the rally point here. One of the younger soldiers, a private named Chen, raised his hand. "Ma'am, what if they don't fall for the diversion? What if they keep forces on the west side?" "Good question," Sarah said. "If we encounter heavy resistance, Bravo team will pivot to a holding position and wait for Alpha to intensify the diversion. We adapt to what we find. Flexibility is key." They spent the rest of the afternoon in preparation, checking gear, rehearsing movements, going over contingencies. Sarah watched her team work together, their initial skepticism now replaced by focus and determination. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges, they moved into position. Alpha team struck first. Simunition fire erupted. From the east side of the bunker, along with flashbangs and shouting, the OPFOR responded exactly as Sarah had predicted, shifting their forces toward the noise. Bravo team moved in from the west, silent and swift. Sarah led them through a side entrance, a narrow maintenance door that their intelligence had identified. Inside the bunker was a maze of concrete corridors dimly lit by emergency lighting. They cleared rooms methodically, using hand signals and practiced movements. Sarah's heart pounded, adrenaline sharpening her senses. This was what she was trained for. This was where she thrived. They found the hostage, a role player in civilian clothes, in a locked room on the lower level. Sarah's team secured the area while one soldier picked the lock. Within minutes, they had the package and were moving back toward the exit. But then, disaster. An OP-4 squad appeared in the corridor ahead, cutting off their escape route. Simunition rounds filled the narrow space. One of Sarah's soldiers went down, hit in the chest, marked as a simulated casualty. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Fall back. Secondary exit, go." They retreated down a side corridor, the hostage between them. Sarah covered the rear, laying down suppressing fire. They burst through an emergency exit into the open air, where Alpha team was waiting with cover fire. They made it to the rally point, hostage secured with only 2 simulated casualties. A success by any measure. Major Lawson was there waiting, along with the other evaluators. His face was unreadable. "Debrief in 1 hour," he said curtly. Back at base, the squad loaded into transport vehicles and headed back to Fort Henderson. They were exhausted but exhilarated. Sarah saw soldiers clapping each other on the back, grinning, replaying key moments. Sergeant Kowalski caught her eye and gave her a nod of genuine respect. But Sarah knew the real judgment would come in the debrief. An hour later, they assembled in Conference Room B, the same room where Sarah had first met the team. Major Lawson stood at the front, arms crossed, his expression stern. "Overall," he began, "the exercise was executed competently. The objective was achieved with acceptable casualty rates. Alpha team's diversion was effective, and Bravo team's infiltration was well coordinated." He paused, his eyes moving to Sarah. "However, there were significant risks taken that could have resulted in mission failure. Captain Mitchell, your decision to cross the ravine on day 1 was reckless. Your decision to enter through the west side maintenance entrance was based on intelligence that could have been outdated. In a real combat situation, those choices could have gotten people killed." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt the familiar frustration rising. He was finding fault where there was none, twisting her successes into failures. "With respect, sir," she said calmly, "the ravine crossing was calculated and executed safely. The west entrance was confirmed by real-time reconnaissance. Every decision I made was based on sound tactical judgment. Lawson's jaw tightened. I'm not questioning your tactical knowledge, Captain. I'm questioning your field experience. You may look good on paper, but paper doesn't bleed. The room went silent. Sarah felt every eye on her. Sir, she said, her voice steady but firm. I have 8 years of direct combat experience across 3 theaters. My record speaks for itself. Lawson leaned forward, his voice cold. Does it? Because from where I'm standing, you're a decorated officer who got lucky a few times and now thinks she can walk into my unit and take charge like she's earned it. You may have a pretty face and an impressive resume, Captain, but that doesn't mean you've been through what these soldiers have been through. The words hung in the air like a slap. Sarah stood slowly, her eyes locked on Lawson's. Around the table, the other officers shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. Sir, Sarah said, her voice quiet but carrying a weight that made everyone lean in. You're right about one thing. You don't know what I've been through. She reached up and began unbuttoning her uniform jacket. Lawson's eyes narrowed. Captain, what are you? Sarah removed her jacket and set it on the chair behind her. Underneath, she wore a standard-issue tan undershirt. And there, visible for the first time to everyone in the room, were the scars. They ran down her left arm, from shoulder to wrist, puckered and discolored. Burn scars unmistakable. But it was her right shoulder and neck that drew gasps from some of those present. The skin was mottled, scarred from fire, a testament to unimaginable pain. 2 years ago, Sarah began, her voice steady. My team was ambushed in Syria. Our convoy hit an IED and our vehicle flipped. Fire started immediately. I was knocked unconscious, but when I came to, I realized my commanding officer was trapped in the driver's seat, pinned by debris. The fire was spreading fast. The room was completely silent now. Even Lawson had gone still. I pulled him out, Sarah continued. The fuel tank exploded while I was dragging him clear. I spent 4 months in a burn unit, 6 surgeries. They told me I'd never return to active duty. They were wrong. She picked up her jacket and slowly put it back on, rebuttoning it with deliberate care. The officer I saved was Colonel James Harrison. Maybe you've heard of him, Major. He commands Special Operations Task Force West. He wrote my letter of recommendation for this assignment. The silence in Conference Room B was absolute. Sarah stood at her full height, her uniform jacket buttoned, her eyes never leaving Major Lawson's face. The scars were hidden again beneath the fabric, but their presence now filled the room like a ghost that couldn't be ignored. Lawson's face had gone pale, then red. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since Sarah had met him, he seemed at a loss for words. Lieutenant Ortiz was staring at Sarah with something like awe. Sergeant Kowalski sat rigid in his chair, his expression a mix of shock and respect. The other officers looked down at the table, suddenly very interested in their notes. Finally, Lawson cleared his throat. Captain Mitchell, I didn't know. No, sir, Sarah said quietly. You didn't ask. The weight of that statement settled over the room like lead. Lawson had judged her from the moment she walked into his office. He'd seen her face, her gender, and made assumptions. He'd never bothered to look deeper, to ask about the experiences that had shaped her, the battles she'd fought both on the field and in hospital rooms. Sarah continued, her voice calm but carrying an edge that cut through the tension. You said paper doesn't bleed, sir. You're right. But I have. My team has. Every soldier in this room has made sacrifices, seen things, endured things that civilians can't imagine. That's not something you can judge by looking at someone. That's not something you determine based on whether someone fits your idea of what a soldier should look like. She gestured to the squad members seated around the table. These soldiers performed exceptionally over the past 3 days. They adapted to working with a new commanding officer. They executed complex tactical maneuvers and they succeeded in their mission. If you're looking for someone to criticize, sir, criticize me for my tactical decisions. But don't you ever question my experience or my dedication to the soldiers under my command. Lawson stood there, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might lash out, pull rank, reassert his authority through sheer force. But something had shifted in his eyes. Shame, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. Dismissed, Lawson said quietly. All of you except Captain Mitchell. The other officers filed out quickly, relief evident on their faces as they escaped the tension. Sergeant Kowalski paused at the door, catching Sarah's eye. He gave her a small nod before leaving. It meant more than words could. When the room was empty, Lawson sat down heavily in his chair. He looked older suddenly, tired. "Captain," he began, then stopped. He rubbed his face with both hands. "I owe you an apology." Sarah remained standing. "Yes, sir, you do." Lawson looked up at her, and for the first time she saw genuine remorse in his expression. "I made assumptions about you from the beginning. That was wrong. It was unprofessional and it was unfair. Your service record speaks for itself, and I should have respected that." Sarah waited. An apology was a start, but words were easy. Actions were what mattered. "I want to make this right," Lawson continued. "There's an upcoming joint operation with the FBI, a counter-terrorism training exercise involving multiple agencies. It's high-profile, complex, exactly the kind of thing that someone with your background would excel at. I'd like to recommend you as the military liaison and tactical coordinator." Sarah considered this. It was a significant opportunity, a high-visibility assignment that could advance her career. But she also knew it was Lawson's way of trying to absolve his guilt. "I'll accept the assignment, sir," she said, "but I want to be clear about something. I'm not here for special treatment or high-profile positions. I'm here to do my job and lead soldiers. That's all I've ever wanted." Lawson nodded slowly. "I understand. And for what it's worth, Captain, after watching you lead that exercise, you're exactly the kind of officer this unit needs." It wasn't much, but it was something. Sarah gave a crisp nod. "Thank you, sir. Will that be all?" "Yes, dismissed." Sarah left the conference room and stepped out into the warm North Carolina afternoon. The base was busy with the usual activity, but it felt different somehow, lighter. She'd faced down the doubt and prejudice once again, and once again she'd proven herself. As she walked toward the barracks, she heard footsteps behind her. Captain Mitchell. She turned to see her entire squad jogging up to her. Sergeant Kowalski was at the front and he came to attention, the others following suit. "Ma'am," Kowalski said, "we just wanted to say that was the best-led exercise we've ever been part of. You earned our respect out there in the field, but what you did back there in the briefing room..." He paused, searching for words. "That took a different kind of courage. We're proud to serve under your command." The other soldiers nodded, murmuring agreement. Private Chen stepped forward. "Ma'am, most of us made judgments about you before we even met you. That was wrong. You're a hell of a soldier, and we'd follow you anywhere." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest, but this time it wasn't from anger or frustration. It was something else. Something warmer. "Thank you," she said simply. "But you all did the hard work. You came together as a team, you executed the mission, and you did it with professionalism and skill. That's on you, not me. I'm just honored to have led you." Over the following weeks, word spread across Fort Henderson about what had happened in the briefing room. The story grew with each telling, as military stories do. But the core remained the same. The new captain, who'd been dismissed as just a pretty face, had scars that told a story of heroism and sacrifice that put most soldiers to shame. Major Lawson, to his credit, followed through on his promise. Sarah was assigned as the military liaison for the joint counterterrorism exercise. Working directly with FBI and ATF agents, the operation was a success, and Sarah's tactical expertise was noted in the after-action reports that went all the way up to the Pentagon. But more importantly, the atmosphere at Fort Henderson changed. Female soldiers who'd felt marginalized or underestimated found their voices. Male soldiers who'd harbored unconscious biases began to question their assumptions. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a shift, small and significant. 3 months after her arrival, Sarah was leading a training session on tactical room clearing when Lieutenant Ortiz approached with a message. "Ma'am, you have a visitor at the main gate." "Colonel James Harrison." Sarah's heart skipped. Colonel Harrison, the man she'd saved from that burning vehicle in Syria, the man whose recommendation had opened doors for her, even as his survival had cost her months of agony and rehabilitation. She made her way to the main gate where a staff car was parked. Colonel Harrison stepped out, older now, grayer, but his eyes still sharp and kind. His left arm hung stiffly at his side, permanent nerve damage from the injuries he'd sustained. "Sarah," he said warmly, pulling her into a careful hug. "It's good to see you." "Colonel, what are you doing here?" Harrison smiled. I was in the area for a conference, and I heard through the grapevine that you'd made quite an impression here. Thought I'd stop by and see how you were doing. They walked together across the base, catching up on the months since they'd last spoken. Harrison told her about his current assignment, about his family, about his recovery. Sarah told him about Fort Henderson, about the exercise, about Major Lawson. Harrison listened carefully, then stopped walking. Sarah, I need you to know something. What you did for me that day in Syria, you gave me my life back. But you gave up so much in the process. The pain you endured, the recovery, the scars you'll carry forever. I think about that every single day. Sarah shook her head. Sir, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. You were my commanding officer. You were my responsibility. No, Harrison said firmly. I was your brother in arms, and you treated me as such. That's what makes you an exceptional soldier. Sarah, not your tactical skills, not your physical courage, but your refusal to leave anyone behind, no matter the cost. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. I've been authorized to present you with something that's long overdue. He opened the box, revealing a medal. The Soldier's Medal, the highest award for heroism not involving actual conflict with an enemy. For your actions in Syria, Harrison said, for saving my life at grave risk to your own. Sarah stared at the medal, emotions warring inside her. She'd never sought recognition for that day. She'd been doing her job, doing what any good soldier would do. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept it, Harrison replied. Say you'll wear it and let it remind you that your service, your sacrifice, and your courage matter. Not just to me, but to every soldier who serves alongside you. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The medal ceremony was held the following week. Major Lawson insisted on hosting it at Fort Henderson, inviting the entire base. Sarah stood at attention in her dress uniform as Colonel Harrison pinned the soldier's medal to her chest, recounting the story of her heroism for all to hear. When it was over, when the applause had faded and the crowd had dispersed, Sarah found Major Lawson waiting for her. Captain Mitchell, he said, extending his hand. It's an honor to have you at Fort Henderson. Sarah shook his hand firmly. Thank you, sir. I meant what I said before, Lawson continued. We need more officers like you, and I need to do better. I'm working on it. Sarah gave him a small smile. We all are, sir. Every day. As she walked back to her quarters that evening, the medal heavy on her chest, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain, the doubt, the constant battle to prove herself in a world that so often judged her by her appearance rather than her actions. She thought about the young female soldiers on base who looked at her differently now, who saw in her a possibility, a path forward. She thought about the men who'd learned to question their assumptions, to look deeper than surface judgments. And she thought about the scars hidden beneath her uniform, the physical reminders of a day when she'd chosen courage over safety, duty over self-preservation. Those scars had once been a source of shame, something to hide, but now she understood they were something else entirely. They were proof that she'd been tested in fire and emerged stronger. Proof that true strength wasn't about appearance or assumptions, but about character and sacrifice. He'd called her just a pretty face. Then he'd seen her scars in the briefing, and everything had changed. But the scars that mattered most, Sarah knew, weren't the ones on her skin. They were the ones etched into her soul. The marks left by every battle fought, every soldier saved, every moment she'd chosen to stand up when it would have been easier to stand down. Those were the scars that defined her. Those were the scars that made her who she was, and she wore them, visible or not, with pride.